One of the things that immigrants and people that are persecuted tend to have in common is a lack of funds. And they don't necessarily come in with money to pay for representation. We'll have a quick little roundtable about pro bono work. If we can go to clip number 4, please. Tevye was one such person.
Well, I'm not really complaining. After all, with your help, I'm starving to death. Oh, dear Lord. You made many poor people. I realize, of course, it's no shame to be poor. But it's no great honor either. So what would have been so terrible if I had a small fortune? If I were a rich man, yabba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dibba-dum. All day long I biddy-biddy-bum, if I were a wealthy man.
So here we go. People looking for a small fortune. People are coming to a firm, to a lawyer. They're looking for representation. They have no money. One has an obligation now to perform a certain number of pro bono hours. But how does one balance the desire to do pro bono work versus the need to make a living? Chris.
Look, everybody's got to make that decision for themselves. At a big law firm, we have sort of the luxury to say we treat it like an obligation, and we do. Without getting too far into the details, and this is something I know is very near and dear and close to Larry's heart as well, it's something that we treat as an obligation. And I think our approach to it, and I'm glad to say what's become my approach, is that in addition to giving something back and hopefully helping someone who needs help, who can't get it somewhere else, you're also helping yourself. You're feeding your soul. And we have found, and I have been a great beneficiary of being around a practice that values that kind of work. But for an individual who's out on their own, I hope that person has the luxury to treat it as an obligation, but it's a very personal decision that I think everybody's got to make for themselves.
Larry, what would you say?
Just to pick up on what Chris said, to me it's an honor to do pro bono work. My great friend, Governor McGreevy, I saw he was here a minute ago. He was the only one that I saw wearing a yarmulke in the front. And by the way, knows more Yiddish than anybody in my family, at least. He spends his whole life working with the people who are in the most difficult of situations emerging from prisons. What a thing to do. And what he says, and what I believe, is that we learn more from doing that and benefit more from doing that, not only because it's good for the soul, but also just from understanding the human experience by representing people in those circumstances. Every single time, I do a lot of big class action cases where in some ways I don't have a client, but I have a lot of cases where I represent poor people who are really in the most difficult of times. And what I learned from that is what it's like to be in the most difficult of times. For the people in this room, it's almost hard to imagine. But it reminds us every day of the difficulty that so many people in our world face. And I think I go about my life in a different and better way because I get to understand, because they've taught me. I always say that pro bono work at the end of the day is us giving, but really it's us getting more than that. And I think it's really important to remember that. There's this actually awesome part of Fiddler, which was a clip that the rabbi didn't play. Right at the beginning, when Tevye is introducing all the characters in the town, he introduces Nahum the beggar. And they show Nahum the beggar saying, alms for the poor, alms for the poor. And Tevye says, here, Reb Nahum, here's 1 kopek. And Nahum says, 1 kopek? Last week you gave me 2 kopeks. And Tevye says, I had a bad week. And he says, so if you had a bad week, why should I suffer? And there's something to that. I think probably Tevye, if he really, really dug deep, as hard as it is, he probably could have come up with those 2 kopeks. I think a lot of times we, even people in small firms who think they can't do it, think that our times are tough, but reach out for those people whose times are so much tougher. You can come up with that additional COPEC.
Judge.
Just put in a quick plug because there are organizations, oh, let me go back a step. I very much admire firms like Chris's firm, Larry's firm, that have a program to deal with pro bono representation. But as you recognized, small firms and solo practitioners can't always do that because taking on a case rarely lets you determine in advance just how much of your time and energy it's going to take. But everyone can make a contribution to legal services. There's no shame in doing it that way.
Rabbi, let me ask you a question. How does one balance the obligation to be charitable in dollars versus the obligation to be charitable in pro bono work? There are people that clearly do one and clearly do the other, but then there are people that have the tevya on one hand, on the other hand. I could write a check, I could volunteer. What's the Jewish values approach of creating a balance between who's writing the checks and who's volunteering their time?
So actually, there's a Jewish law approach, and then there's tradition. And
I thought we
by
didn't like.
Jewish
I thought we
law,
didn't like tradition.
charity is an obligation. Jewish courts actually used to extract from people a yearly sum that they considered appropriate. And it was pretty sophisticated. We have a tax code you wouldn't believe. And it goes back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. But we call it tzedakah. Tzedakah people think means charity, but it's not. Maimonides points out, you've all heard of Maimonides in Guide to the Perplexed, tzedakah comes from the word tzedek, which means justice. It doesn't mean charity. It comes from the recognition that there are wrongs out there that the law itself cannot right, and that it's our obligation to do so. So I can't give you the dollar amount other than to appeal to tradition, which was 10%. That got started with us. And the great decisor of the last generation, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, said that the same way that you're obligated to give 10% of your income to charitable causes, you should give 10% of your time. At least free time.
Chris.
10%, we're going to have to up our game. I think we were, maybe in equivalent dollars, $10 million of effort devoted by a full-time partner, several full-time associates, and all the work that all the other lawyers did. But the one thing we didn't do, and I don't think we'll ever do, is make it a requirement. People have to do it because they want to do it, and they should want to do it. But we don't say to our associates, just because it would raise our pro bono grade, that you have to. We hope that we can create opportunities and programs where people will want to, and we've been very pleased, and I think in general the community, the legal community here in New Jersey has been very supportive of pro bono efforts, and I hope that continues.
If your clients wanted you to make it a requirement, if they said we only do business with law firms that have a required pro bono time for all their partners, would that be a consideration?
How big's the client?
Big. To be continued.
We don't bend to one client.
No, but one thing, clients have shifted this landscape a little bit by requesting or looking, that clients look for firms that do pro bono work. That is a factor today for the betterment of everyone.
We love partnering with our clients to engage in pro bono efforts. It's, that's a real win-win. The capitalistic side of the operation and the philanthropic side get to work together. But in terms of making it a requirement, just like Larry, it's above my pay grade, but I wouldn't be supportive of it.
So there are clients who require that firms have a diversity program. Now, that's fine because it's something you could all subscribe to, but suppose the client wants you to do something or exclude something that doesn't fit